Welcome to Education News, weekly television to help share the diversity and richness of the people and institutions in our community. Artistic Perspectives, a continuing series of programs to feature the activities and works of local artists and art organizations. Claude Needham, born 1951, is by education a PhD molecular biophysicist turned artist. Claude is a published author, programmer, and webmaster, but his first love, art, is manifested in his paintings, jewelry, woodworking, and ultimately in his sculpture. In this program, fellow artist Zoe Alowan visits with Claude in his outdoor studio to explore several of his recent works, his development process, and some of the sculpturing techniques Claude applies.
Hi, I'm Zoe Alowan, so I'd like to introduce to you Claude Needham. Good morning, Claude.
Good morning, Zoe.
I'm here in this studio. I see all these beautiful pieces of rock, and I'm curious, how did you get started? What's your artist background? What's your development been to bring you to this stage?
It's a bit eclectic. I started doing art when I was a child. At the time, I didn't know it was art. I called it just doing things, making stuff. Turns out that I was making sculpture, ensemblage, found art, ceramics. But at the time it wasn't photographic, it wasn't photorealism. It didn't look like the stuff that was being produced in the 50s, which is when I started. Hence, I didn't understand that I was doing art. In fact, I didn't know I was doing art until 1980s.
And what happened in 1980s? What changed in your for your artistic development?
Well, after a 40-year sojourn through science and computing, I retired, or semi-retired, from a computer company I had and began to do art in a serious fashion. That's when I discovered Dubuffet, Brancusi, Noguchi, and all of the folks that I've been imitating without knowing it.
You discovered these different artists, and then you found that they were doing similar explorations to kind of the experiments that you were doing all throughout your life.
Typically after I would show a piece to someone who knew more about art, they would say, "Oh, I see you've been studying ARP." And I'd say, "No." And I'd say, "Who's ARP?" And they would tell me, and then I'd research them, and I'd find out where that was coming from. The pieces that I've been doing, with the exception of Calder's mobiles, have all been pretty intuitive. And then when I would find somebody like Brancusi, I would make a study of his material. But usually that was after the fact, after I was started on a series.
So is your favorite medium stone?
At the moment it is. I've gone through periods. I started with wood and found objects, an assemblage, and then one day a friend lent me some stone chisels and rasps and a big chunk of rock, alabaster, and I've been doing primarily stone ever since. You'll find in my works in many homes. For the first 10 years of my career, I sold my pieces pretty much as soon as they were produced, with a few exceptions. I kept these, actually I have 4 or 5 of my early works in the white alabaster. All of the rest have been sold or donated to various museums and foundations. You'll find them in private collections. Recently I was made aware of the fact that it really is important to do a show, so I've been a little more retentive about my pieces, and I've actually stopped selling for the past 2 years so that I can collect enough pieces for a show. Otherwise, my previous 30-40 pieces are all distributed throughout the world. Some Canada, Germany, one piece in Japan, and various other points around the globe.
Do you have like a time of day that you always or set aside for your work? I mean, is like there's a way in which you've committed a certain amount of work time every week?
It depends on my schedule. If I'm under a heavy obligation to something else, I'll put in a couple hours a day sculpting. Every now and then, there's like an ideal strike, or a stone will really grab me, and there's a sculpture that needs to be done. those are dangerous times for me physically, because I'll start sculpting on Monday and I'll finish on Thursday, and I'll pretty much work straight through with a few hours sleep. Other than that, I just work at a piece bit by bit, with a few exceptions. Sometimes I'll have a piece that I'll start and I won't know where to go with it. I'll get it to a certain point and I don't want to go too far without seeing clearly what the piece is to be. I've had those sit around for a year or two before completion.
And what other mediums are you working in? I know you aside from the sculpture.
I'll pretty much work with any medium that I have the tools for. I've worked with metal, I've worked in ceramics, I work in paper, doing both paper sculpture and works on paper. I'll do canvas. I love working with acrylics. Oils, I am intolerant of the linseed oil, so I don't work with oils. I've done many mobiles. I worked with moving water. I've worked with kinetic sculptures. There's no realm of sculpture or art that I've not really been interested in, with the possible exception of conceptual art, which used to mean you had an idea and you did nothing about it. There's something about that didn't strike me. Otherwise, I guess you could call me an art slut. I'll do pretty much anything.
Well, in your outdoor studio here, I see all kinds of mysterious chunks of stone and sandbags, and yes, I see a number of different pieces of stone. This looks like a different kind of stone than that. Could you tell us about the stone that you're working with, where you get it, what it is?
Well, the stone is the same. It's alabaster. It's a form of calcium sulfite. However, they come from very different regions. This is Italian. The white material here is Italian alabaster. These other chunks that you see lying around untouched, those are Colorado alabaster. They're not as crystalline, they're not as pure, the pieces that I have. However, they're very interesting in their colorations and the mottled effects that you can get from them. So while they're different, they're equally inspiring.
So, Claude, could you describe for us your approach to sculpture?
I tend to work in series. I'll work with a particular motif or a particular base form for 3 or 4 sculptures, and then I'll transition into another, typically from something that happened in the previous series. In fact, in the pieces here, if you like, I can describe the various series that I've worked through in my evolution, so to speak, of sculpture in alabaster. This is one of my earliest alabasters. At this time, I was working with masks of various sorts. I started by doing some wooden sculptures of masks, and then I was beginning working in stone. And you'll see some of the sort of multiplicity of forms in here. But this was a definite early series. There's about 6 pieces of this type that were made at that time. This is one that I have remaining. From here, I transitioned into my Taurus series. Many different forms, topologically a donut, and I have about 8 pieces of this variety. From here, the form opened up, and I was working with what I call an, I guess, just open torus.
What is a torus? Is this
It's a mathematical term for a donut.
Oh.
From this series, this was the last piece in the Italian alabaster. I ordered the Colorado alabaster, and when it arrived, I started doing pieces back in this style, and it wasn't working. I was done with that. I was actually being safe, trying to start up with something that I was very familiar with. Through a concatenation of events, I ended up doing what I call my post-classic Neolithic. These are little fetishes, whatever you want to call them. They're just little animal forms in very abstracted, reductionist aspect. I have a hippo and ducks and bears, buffalo or two, and I did about 15 pieces in that style. From here, I transitioned into, or back, to what I call plasmamorphic. Some folks call them biomorphic, but I don't see anything biological about it. To me, they're more reminiscent of plasma. I don't mean blood plasma, I'm referring to plasma of the electrical sort. And this was one of the first pieces back. You can actually, if you look in here, you'll see that this little guy used to be sort of like this guy, and then I just got it into my head to cut into the side, and this is what it evolved into. Okay, then these are more pieces along that line. This is the forms that I'm working now, and I really enjoy this form. The fetishes, some of my collectors really like them a lot. For me, they're just something that was appropriate at the time. It's not really where I sat. This is more of the variety that and direction where I want to be going.
So what is your sculpting process? Like, how do you prepare?
Probably the best way to answer that is to step through the various stages. I can give you examples of the various steps in the process.
Oh, that would be very helpful for us to understand how that block of stone becomes something as smooth and carefully formed as these sculptures.
All right. This is a raw block of stone. It's not completely raw. It was cut from the quarry. You can see the cut marks here. This is raw surface that was exposed to weather, and here's another cut mark. Like this piece down here, it's cut on many different sides. That reveals a little bit of what the inside of the stone's going to be like, and it can give a clue of where the stone will go. I start with the raw stone, and I'll typically live with the stone for either days, weeks, or months. Then at some point in the process, I'll get an impulse. I'll look at it and I'll say, ah. And I don't even necessarily know what the piece is going to be, but I just get a vague impulse that there's something waiting in there and it's time for that one. Because I do work on the stones in sequence. Mm-hmm. I'll work on one and then the next one will strike me. Some of the stones I've had for 10 years and I haven't the foggiest idea what I'm going to do with them yet. Other stones I'll have for a week and I'll already have started a sculpture.
So this is the once upon a time there was a piece of stone, and that's the stage?
Yeah. This one has yet to speak to me, so we'll move this one out of the way.
Okay. How much do these pieces weigh?
Anywhere from 50 for small ones to 100 pounds for the larger ones. You can get them bigger, but I'm working 50 to 100 pounds at the moment.
Okay.
I don't want to use block and tackle. This piece I have started. It's a difficult piece. It's got all of these gnarly bits carved into it from the weather. However, with the new series I'm doing, I think I see where I want to take this. So the first stage in the process is roughing. I like to rough out using either a little coping saw or a drywall saw. They will cut stone. This one I started just so we don't have to stand around forever waiting for it to be cut.
That saw actually makes it look like it's a soft material, not like a big, heavy chunk of stone.
I know, it's very bizarre. It cuts with a saw. Now that I've got it pretty much cut, I'll typically hit it with a chisel. Okay, I have 3 chisels I work with. There's maybe another 20 chisels you could have. I find everything I need to do, I can work with these. And you were asking earlier what the chunks were doing sitting around. I like to cut them out in chunks because I then use these for smaller sculpture. Now this piece here I know I'm going to leave. I'm going to be coming into here, but I don't want to do that yet because we have a mess over here. For this, I could use pneumatic drills and chisels and diamond saws and all kinds of cutters. I don't like working that way. Apart from the fact that it tends to give you arthritis and other hand damage, I don't like using electrical devices. They're just too noisy. So for this first stage, just roughing it out, I'll use the big chisel and I'll just hack away at it. I'll identify a piece I know is going to be removed and I'll remove it. As you can see, it's not an indoor sport. For this, I would continue working this way until I get to the stage which I call having a notion of what the piece actually is. And I can show you that with a different piece, unless you want to wait 8 hours while I...
No, that's all right. I see a lot of progress has been made on this piece.
Yeah, this piece was like the raw stone a while ago. This is what I call having a notion. I'm beginning to see what the piece is going to look like, and I'm honing in on it. I'm like homing. The coarse tuning's done, and I'm starting to fine tune. This, I don't know if you can see it, but there's like 2 amorphous objects, one draped over the other. And at this point, if I identify a big chunk, then I'll go back to this chisel. Otherwise, I like working with this little guy because it starts to give me some of the surfacing. And at this point, I'm not working with big chunks anymore, just little teeny bits. There's one element missing, which we'll have to get to in order for the big stone. With the raw stones, they're flat on the bottom, so you can work. But for this, I need my sandbags. Now you can buy expensive sandbags, or you can make them. I bought the expensive sandbags, and they got destroyed very quickly, so I made some. And then my other sandbag is just a sock filled with sand, which I can use to give me elevation.
So this helps it be curved, and you can still work with it in a steady way and keep your curved surfaces.
You don't want to bruise the stone. This stone will bruise. It's like, with this chisel, see these marks of white? That's actually bruising, and that goes in a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch on the stone. So at this stage, I'll continue working with the chisel, and I may or may not be chiseling correctly, and I went at it, and if it removed stone, I figured I was doing it right, and if it didn't, I changed what I was doing. Now, sometime during this process, I'll begin working with rasps. Here's my large one. These are just, they call them cabinet rasps. You can use wood rasps on the alabaster, because the alabaster is a relatively soft stone. And it's just filing away. Now, during the process of taking it past this point, I know that I'm going to want to round this off, and I want to get rid of all of the teeth marks. So this is the time when I need to do that. So I'll go in and I'll start removing those. And you'll notice I work very much in the round. So you can be rotated every which way. But also, I approach it with the same level of processing all along. I don't leave one chunk totally undone and do another chunk. Because if you do that, you could find out that as you flip back and forth, you regret a decision you made on another side of the stone. So when I'm going to make a decision on one side of the stone, I rotate it to make sure that that decision is in balance with what's happening in the rest of the piece. And one of the reasons this piece is sitting in its current condition is I have a couple of decisions to make. You can see I'm starting to cut up into here, and I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if it's appropriate to loop this back to have that form show up. So I'm still toying with it, and I'm approaching it slowly. Hopefully by the time I finish filing away all of the bumps that I know have to be removed, I'll be able to get a clear vision of what's happening with the piece. And that will lead me to the next stage, or at least the next stage that I've identified for myself, which is when I finally get a vision of what's happening with the stone. I can show you that on another piece.
Before we do that, would it be okay with you if I tried my hand at this?
Oh, sure.
You just show me tell me what to do? Okay,
Oh, here, go ahead and do that.
All right, so.
Okay, now hold a minute. The teeth only cut when you go forward. And don't put any pressure on the way back. Just let it glide. It keeps your tool sharper and it just cuts better. There you go.
This is fun.
Now, it's like grinding a lens for a telescope. The way you move the rasp determines the form. So you glide this over and push it in arcs. Even though it looks like you're going on a flat plane, you never are. It's always in arcs. Okay?
Thank you.
But we
For
have
the
other
lesson.
stones.
So you had another stone you wanted to show me?
Yeah.
I see there's very few ridges here, comparatively.
I've been sneaking up on this piece for about a month now, a little bit at a time. This is looking very different than it was, because I thought it was, when I first got a notion of what this was, I thought it was like an abstracted, mutated jack from, playing jack and ball and jacks. But I realized just the other day that this is actually a figure. This is the vision I have of it, is that it's a figure with a snake coming out of the heart. Don't ask me where that comes from. It's the stone. Now that I have that, the piece is coming together, and I can make decisions like what's happening up in here. I can make those decisions, and I can refine it. This process of taking this and refining it can take anywhere from days to months. Because as I approach the final form, I'll be getting rid of, chunks, and then suddenly I'll discover a big lump that I want to get rid of. And in this one, This is a nice curve in here, but I'm really toying with bringing this way up and in and just making these almost spindly. But I don't know. So I have to follow the vision that I have now, bit by bit and step by step. Doing this, I work with very different tools. These are the two tools I use at this point. They're smaller rasps, which it's not the smallness so much as how they fit in my hand that's important. These become much more an extension of my arm, and they allow me to get in and work the surface so in a way I can feel it. This makes lots of dust. This is my favorite stage. I enjoy the other stages, but at this stage I'm really in communication with the sculpture, and it's no longer searching in the dark trying to find what the stone holds. That's been revealed. Now it's just a question of refining it and bringing it out.
It's amazing to me the quality of attention that you're putting on something that moves it from this hunk of stone to this. And I see an almost meditative quality to what you're doing, especially because you're not using the power tools.
Yeah, the noise and just the 60 cycle hum is enough to be disturbing to me. Yeah, I don't know what else to tell you about this stage other than with a piece like this, at this point it becomes dangerous to work with chisel, because until I knew what this was, it wouldn't matter to me if this broke off. But at this point it would just be so disappointing if a miscalculated chisel hit snapped that away. Okay.
So how do you bring it to the super smooth stage?
That I'll show you with
Okay.
another piece.
Great.
This piece is I've taken this down with the rasp as far as I'm going to take it. Now it's a question of just sanding it. And for that, I just use wet and dry sandpaper, and I use it wet. I start with 120 and then work through the grades of 220, 320, 400, 600, and finally to 1500. The thing about sanding is this stone is a little bit soluble in water. So the powder forms a slick, which lets you feel any scratches in the stone. Now when you work with 120 sandpaper, the lower the number, the more gritty it is. When you work with 120, it'll remove large scratches, but it leaves its own scratches. You can feel how rough that is. So that'll leave its own scratches. Then when you go down to 220, this will remove all of the 120 scratches and leave its own. Now anything that you leave that you were supposed to attack with the 120, the 220 cannot remove. It's made only to remove the scratches left by this.
How much time will it take on this piece to completely go over the whole surface?
Couple hours. The sanding goes very quickly. It only takes a couple hours. I've thought of allowing others to sand it, but the sanding actually removes form. It changes the shape. I mean, if you just stick in one spot and go back and forth and you don't round it properly, you'll change the contours of the piece. Hence, I have to do all my own sanding, even though some folks have been begging, because the stone really feels
good at this
Yeah.
point, doesn't it?
especially when you get down to the 600 and 1500 grit. And then when I'm done, I'll either put beeswax or silicone grease to fill the pores and to help protect the stone, because it will absorb oils from your skin. And that's it.
Uh-huh. Just like that.
Just like that.
Looking at this, I wonder how being a sculptor affects your spiritual life.
For me, sculpting is a way of breathing. It's like the breath of the essential self. And if anything else is put on it, I think that's a distraction from the simplicity of what it really is.
How does this affect your social life? Because it looks like this takes a lot of time.
Well, apart from taking time away from what social life I might have, I keep my art and social endeavors totally separate. I know that that's not necessarily common. There's a lot of folks that seem to use their art as a means to acquire a social life. I'm very happy with what social life I have, which I acquire through other mechanisms.
Where do you see all this taking you? Do you have any vision of that, where it's going?
At this point, I'm on a strategy. I have about 50 or 60 smaller pieces to do, and I'm working from smaller to larger. I expect in 2 to 3 years to be doing monumental pieces, big guys. Those will require block and tackle. Those will also require lots of financing, because the stone itself will be $5,000–$10,000 just to get the stone, and then you have to hire trucks, and everything becomes more difficult. By then I'll have worked out what I intend to do with the stone, because you're not as free when you're working with a commission of that size to tell your client, well, I'll just do whatever happens. They want to see a maquette, a small version, and they want you to work toward it. And those pieces also won't be able to be done in alabaster unless they're indoor, because alabaster is not a good garden stone. It tends to dissolve in the rain.
So you might be moving into granite?
I don't know. Maybe granite, or there's a thing, I don't remember its common name, but it's another form of calcium that does not dissolve in rain. It's like marble, but it's not quite the same consistency. At this point, I'm not really excited by marble. I like the more amorphous stones.
Well, is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you'd like to say about your art and this art experience of being a sculptor? Yeah.
Alabaster is very approachable, and I think it's actually a more approachable sculpture form than clay or plastilina. Because if you're doing clay and if you don't do it right, it'll explode in the kiln and you lose everything. If you're working with plastilina, you have the big megillah of taking it to a bronze or getting a cast made in hydrocal. There's more technology involved in it. It takes it out of the realm of a newbie being able to get something actually done and put on the shelf somewhere. Alabaster, I appreciate as a teaching stone. It's very approachable and extremely satisfying. I've taught several people to sculpt now, mostly youngsters, and youngsters anything less than 30 at this point. And they've all come away becoming artists, and they're sculptors now.
Yeah. Well, the next time you do a class, I think I'd like to be on the list, because watching you work like this has really given me a feeling of taking something that I thought was impossible to work with, and it's possible. And that's really quite amazing for me, and I hope that the viewers out there get that same feeling of seeing something that seems hard made easy, and also something about the right attitude that you need to bring to it to make it satisfying. So thank you very much for sharing with us today. And it's just one more example of the hidden treasures that we have here in the Sierra foothills.